In the winter of 1982, the cold winds of the Atacama Desert seemed to carry secrets that had remained buried for centuries. A group of archaeologists, led by Professor Richard Vance, had set up camp near a small town in the outskirts of San Pedro, Arizona. They had been drawn there by the promise of discovering an ancient tomb that, according to local lore, belonged to a woman known as Añañuca. Though her true origins were uncertain, there was a legend of tragic love and a fate marked by betrayal. The expedition was ambitious. Alongside Professor Vance was his assistant, Isabella Carter, a young woman passionate about pre-Columbian civilizations. There was also Martin Miller, a geologist whose knowledge of the region was invaluable, as well as two university students, Carla and Andrew, who were eager to learn and make a name for themselves in the academic world. The camp was set up near a stretch of land known as the Fields of Silence, an area so desolate that even the locals avoided talking about it too much. It was a place of stark beauty, with rolling dunes and clear skies, but it also carried an energy that was difficult to ignore. The first day passed uneventfully. Using old maps and modern tools, the team began excavating what they believed was a ceremonial grave. Isabella was the first to find something, a fragment of pottery decorated with geometric designs consistent with the cultures of the region. "This confirms we're in the right place," she said, showing the fragment to Professor Vance. The team's excitement was palpable. However, that same night, the first signs appeared that something wasn't quite right. While they were having dinner under a sky full of stars, a sudden gust of wind swept through the camp, extinguishing the kerosene lamps. Andrew stood up to relight them, but froze mid-step. "Did you hear that?" he asked, his voice trembling. The others fell silent. At first, they heard nothing. Then a sound reached them, a soft whisper, like a distant song carried, though his expression betrayed concern. "This also means we need to tread cautiously. Artifacts of this kind are often steeped in symbolism, and the locals are highly sensitive to such matters. We don't want to offend anyone." However, his warning came too late. That very night, the camp became a place of unease. Carla was the first to speak up, waking in the middle of the night screaming. She claimed she had seen a woman standing next to the tent. Her description was vivid. The figure wore an ancient white dress, her hair tied with a red ribbon. Carla insisted that the woman's eyes were not human. "She was looking at me, but I don't know how to explain it. I wasn't scared, but I couldn't move," Carla said, trembling. Martin and Andrew searched the perimeter of the camp, but found no evidence of anyone being there. Despite this, Carla stood by her claim. "Maybe you were just exhausted, Carla," Isabella suggested, trying to calm her. "We all are. This place has—" The words were unintelligible, but the melody was hauntingly melancholic, sending chills down their spines. "It's probably just the wind through the rocks," Martin said, trying to sound rational, though his voice betrayed his nervousness. They decided to ignore it and continued their evening, but the whisper persisted throughout the night, growing louder with each passing hour. The next day, Isabella and Martin made a significant discovery, a small underground chamber. Upon entering, they found human remains carefully arranged, surrounded by offerings that included pottery, textiles, and copper jewelry. At the center of the chamber was a funerary urn that stood out for its intricate design. Among the objects, Isabella found a necklace with reddish stones that seemed to glow with an otherworldly intensity. "This is incredible. This must have belonged to someone very important," she said, holding the necklace delicately. The team's excitement was momentarily overshadowed by an unshakable feeling of being watched, as if the silence of the fields had grown heavier. "Be careful," Professor Vance warned. "A strange energy, though." Carla wasn't the only one affected. That same night, Isabella dreamed of the same woman. In her dream, the figure sang the same haunting melody they had heard days before. When Isabella woke up, she felt an unsettling sensation, as though someone had been watching her. On the third day, a small group of locals arrived at the camp, elderly men and women, their faces weathered by the desert sun. One of them, an elder named Don Elijah, asked to speak privately with Professor Vance. "What I'm about to tell you is for your safety," the elder said in a firm voice. "You shouldn't be here. This place is cursed. Añañuca does not want to be disturbed." Vance attempted to explain that they were there for academic purposes, but Don Elijah shook his head. "You don't understand what you've done. You've awakened something that doesn't belong to this world. If you stay, you risk losing yourselves. Not in the desert, but in your own minds." Professor Vance thanked the elder for his concern, but chose to dismiss the warning, convinced that nothing supernatural was happening at the site. That night, Andrew's behavior grew increasingly erratic. He claimed he could hear the woman's voice even during the day, and he said she was speaking directly to him. "She says it isn't fair," Andrew muttered, his eyes glazed over. "It shouldn't have ended like this." Martin and Vance tried to reassure him, but his condition worsened. Andrew began wandering the camp, muttering incoherent phrases and humming the eerie melody they had all heard before. Finally, Isabella and Carla managed to convince Professor Vance that they needed to act. "This isn't just stress, Professor. There's something wrong with this place," Isabella insisted. Reluctantly, Vance agreed. He decided it was time to return to town to seek help. However, the desert seemed unwilling to let them leave so easily. The next morning was filled with tension, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Andrew showed no signs of improvement, his ramblings and vacant stare making it clear that something had taken hold of him. Isabella and Carla tried to care for him while Vance and Martin checked the equipment to plan their return to town. But the atmosphere in the camp had changed. The air felt heavier, and a strange silence blanketed the area, broken only by an almost imperceptible whisper carried by the wind. By mid-morning, Vance and Martin set out to explore a route back to town. Though the path seemed straightforward at first, they began to notice something unusual. The markers they had left to guide them back to the camp were gone. The footprints in the sand were immediately swept away by a wind that didn't feel natural. "This doesn't make any sense," Martin said, consulting the compass. But the needle was spinning erratically. "Do you think someone's messing with us?" Vance asked, trying to sound calm, though his tone betrayed his growing unease. Martin shook his head but said nothing. Both men knew no one else was around. They decided to head back to the camp. However, what should have been a 15-minute walk turned into an hour of confusion and uncertainty. Finally, they found the camp, but something felt off. Everything was in its place, just as they had left it, yet the air was heavy, almost suffocating. Meanwhile, at the camp, Isabella and Carla were doing their best to care for Andrew, who was only getting worse. The young man had stopped mumbling incoherently and now repeated a single phrase over and over. "She wants justice. She wants justice." "Who, Andrew? Who are you talking about?" Carla asked, her voice trembling. Andrew stared at her with wide, terrified eyes and finally whispered, "Añañuca, she's here. She's with us." Carla, terrified, backed away, but Isabella tried to stay calm. She knew there was something about this place, something beyond explanation. But she also knew they needed to stay united if they wanted to survive. Determined to understand what was happening, Isabella decided to examine the necklace she had found in the burial chamber. From the moment she had picked it up, she had felt an eerie connection to it, as though the object was speaking to her in silent whispers. Looking at it more closely, she noticed intricate inscriptions carved into the reddish stones. They were symbols she didn't recognize, but they seemed to form a message. "What is this?" she murmured to herself as she ran her fingers over the stones. Just then, a gust of wind swept through the camp, and the necklace slipped from her hands. As she reached down to pick it up, she noticed that the stones seemed to glow faintly, almost as if they were alive. "This isn't normal," she said, rushing to show it to Professor Vance when he returned. He examined it carefully, but was just as baffled. "It could be some sort of ritual message, but I don't recognize these symbols. They might belong to a long-lost local language," he said. Martin, overhearing the conversation, chimed in. "The locals have always said this land is cursed. Maybe this necklace is part of that curse," he said grimly. That night, tensions reached their peak. As the group ate in uneasy silence, Carla suddenly dropped her plate and froze, staring into the darkness of the desert. "What's wrong?" Isabella asked, standing up. Carla slowly raised a trembling finger and pointed toward the horizon. There, in the faint glow of the moonlight, stood the figure of a woman. She was motionless, dressed in white, her dark hair cascading in waves. Though her face wasn't visible, her posture radiated a profound sadness. "It's her. It's Añañuca," Andrew whispered, for the first time in hours seeming completely lucid. The figure began to move, slowly making her way toward the camp. Each step seemed to echo in the air, though the desert itself was utterly silent. The group instinctively backed away, but none of them could look away. As the woman drew closer, her features became clearer. But just as she was near enough for them to make out her face, her form began to dissolve, as if the wind were breaking her into tiny fragments. The woman's form, though fragmented into light, didn't completely vanish. A soft voice, laden with sorrow, echoed through the air. "Don't leave me alone. Don't forget me." The apparition left the group in stunned silence. Though Professor Vance tried to rationalize what they had witnessed, he knew he couldn't dismiss what they all had seen. The next day, Don Ologio returned with a group of villagers, their faces grave, almost mournful. "We warned you not to come here," the old man said. "You've awakened something you cannot control. If you stay, you will end up like others before you, lost in the desert, driven mad." Vance attempted to argue, but Isabella interrupted him. "Professor, I think they're right. We can't stay. This isn't just an archaeological site, there's something else here." Reluctantly, Vance agreed. The group began packing their belongings, though Andrew remained in an almost catatonic state. As they dismantled the camp, everyone felt the undeniable sensation of being watched. Something unseen lingered in the distance, observing them. When they finally left, the desert wind rose, as if bidding them farewell. Though they tried not to look back, Isabella couldn't help herself. In the distance, near a solitary tree that marked the excavation site, she thought she saw the woman again. This time, she wasn't alone. Smaller shadows moved around her, as if keeping her company. The trek back to the village was quiet, each member of the team burdened by the weight of what had occurred. Andrew, lost in a state of lethargy, occasionally murmured incoherent words. Carla spoke very little, constantly glancing over her shoulder, as though fearing she might see something she shouldn't. Isabella felt utterly drained, physically and emotionally. The weight of the red stone necklace she still carried pressed on her, as if the object itself held memories that refused to fade. Professor Vance tried to maintain a calm demeanor, but his face betrayed his worry. The desert, vast and silent, seemed to watch them as they departed, every step a reminder of its eerie omnipresence. When they arrived back in the village, they were met with furtive glances from the locals. Word of their expedition had already spread. Though no one approached them directly, whispered conversations and disapproving looks were impossible to ignore. Don Ologio was the only one who spoke to them. His face bore a mixture of sadness and resignation. "You did the right thing by leaving," he said, "but you are not the same as before. This place leaves its mark on those who dare enter." Professor Vance attempted to thank him, but the old man raised his hand to stop him. "It's not me you should thank. Now you must live with what you've seen. Remember, the desert doesn't forget, and neither should you." As the days passed, it became clear that the group could not move on as if nothing had happened. Andrew was taken back to Santiago, where he was admitted to a psychiatric clinic. Doctors were unable to explain his condition, labeling it a nervous breakdown. Carla decided to leave the field of archaeology entirely, unwilling to face the lingering fear that the experience had left her with. Isabella struggled with recurring dreams of the woman and the strange melody that still seemed to echo in her mind. She kept the necklace, unable to bring herself to discard it, though she often wondered if it was a mistake to hold on to it. As for Professor Vance, he tried to continue his academic work, but the experience left an indelible mark on him. He stopped returning to the field, opting instead to focus on teaching and research. The desert, vast and timeless, had claimed another piece of their souls, leaving them to wonder if they had left anything behind, or if they had taken something with them that would never let them go. Severe. Isabel visited Andrew once. She said he stared at her for several minutes, before whispering, "She won't let me go. You know it too." Carla, on the other hand, decided to leave archaeology altogether. During a final conversation with Isabel, she confessed that she could no longer bear the thought of entering another site like that. "It's like the desert saw something in me, something I didn't want to face. I never want to feel that again." Professor Vance tried to continue his work, but his reputation was irreparably damaged. The incident with the locals and the rumors of a curse tarnished his credibility in the academic community. Though he never admitted it, Isabel noticed he avoided any mention of the archaeological site. It was as if he was too afraid to remember. Isabel, meanwhile, was unable to detach herself from the necklace, though not physically. The artifact had been collected by the Academy for further study, yet she maintained a strange connection to it. She claimed that sometimes she dreamt of holding it in her hands and heard a woman's voice in her dreams, softly pleading, "Don't forget me." The villagers continued to speak of the archaeologists long after they had left. In the plazas and markets, their story became woven into local legend, transforming facts into myth. Some claimed to have seen the Añañuca following them as they departed, while others insisted that the archaeologists had awakened something much older than her. Don Eulogio, for his part, became the unofficial guardian of the site. Although he never returned to the exact location, he made it his duty to warn outsiders who showed interest in exploring the area. "Show respect," he would say. "This place isn't for us, it's for them, and they don't want us there." Years later, Isabel published an article about the emotional impact archaeological sites have on those who work on them. While she never directly mentioned what had happened in Añañuca, the text was filled with reflections on the connection between the past and the present, and how certain places seem to possess a memory of their own. The Atacama Desert, with its infinite beauty and hidden secrets, remained a place that defied logic. For those who had faced it, Isabel, Carla, and Professor Vance, it became clear that not all mysteries are meant to be solved. Sometimes it's better to let the past rest where it belongs, beneath the sand and the eternal silence. The moral of The Lady of the Fields is that some mysteries of the past are meant to remain undisturbed. Human curiosity and the pursuit of knowledge should be tempered with respect for history, culture, and the unseen forces that may linger in certain places. The story emphasizes the importance of understanding that not all questions need answers, and that some boundaries, especially spiritual or cultural, should not be crossed. It also serves as a cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring local wisdom and disrespecting the memories of those who came before us. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe channel.